Hi everybody and welcome to this video of the Simplified Openings series. The variation I'm about to show you in this video has a very curious personal history with me. Uh, I used to play it a lot when I was a kid, hoping for a quick equalization with the black pieces after one of white's most natural moves, only to find out now, decades later, that what I was actually hoping for would have been dead lost for me. Luckily, nobody found the refutation, and I was getting good positions in this line, only to abandon it later as I considered it completely refuted um, from Black's point of view. However, I think approximately 5 years ago, around 2020, and in the years that followed, it was first Badur Jobava, known for his very original ideas, and then none other than Arjun Erigaisi, who picked up this line again and started using it, especially at faster time controls. I was very intrigued by this because I was pretty convinced that the line was refuted and basically cannot be played. So I gave it a kind of a closer look, and in this video, I'm going to present you with my findings. To say at the beginning, my conclusion is that the line is borderline playable. It's extremely risky for black, but also the more or less one or maximum two ways that white can play to put extreme pressure on black's position are not so easy to find, to play, or even prepare. So, from a practical perspective, the variation is actually probably a good try because in the other variations, blacks obtains quite interesting and not very standard Sicilian positions. So, without further ado, let me show you what I have in mind. E4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3. So far standard moves. Sometimes white has lately tried even to go bishop d3, but this is very harmless because after knight c6, targeting the knight on d4 immediately, not protected by the queen anymore, knight c6. Now both recaptures are possible, but the simpler one is d takes c6 with e5 next. And this structure is very good for black, very comfortable, easy development. Bishop can come to c5, the other one to e6, queen to c7. Sometimes plans with long castle are also possible. This is good for black. So knight c3, and now the move bishop b4, pinning the knight on c3 and attacking the pawn on e4. Like I said, in my youth, this was considered as a tricky line and one that immediately puts pressure on white and trying to catch some unprepared players. In this variation. Now, the curious part that I mentioned at the beginning is that back then I was hoping for the move bishop d3 and I was getting it a lot. And here I consider that black has good play with two moves. First one is d5 and the other one is e5. Only to find out after checking carefully the lines in modern times that both moves are actually bad for black. Well, speaking of evolution of theory. Just to show you, d5, this is what I was normally playing. And even here, after ed5, knight d5, this I thought that this was just great for black. Black achieved the d5 push. There is pressure on c3, knight c6, castle, z5 is coming, but even here, queen g4 is problematic for black. The pawn is hanging, and there are tricks like knight e6 in case of this knight not being on d5. The bishop can hang on b4 and so on. But the actual refutation is e5, knight d7, queen g4, and black is in big trouble here. g6, knight takes c6. The point being that the bishop is hanging, bishop c3, bc3, fe6, bishop g6, check, take on g6, queen g6, king f8, and the killer blow from the other side, bishop a3. It's basically a mate. Black is forced to go queen e7, losing the queen, and after that, queen g7, queen h8. It's just game over. So, many dodged bullets back in the days, hoping for d5. Now, the other move e5 is not so much better, because after knight d, e2, d5, e5, knight e5, castles, take on c3, take on c3. The problem for black is that the queen is coming to h5, and the black king will not have a safe shelter. So let's say knight c6, queen h5, and it's problematic. There is no castling possible because of the threat of mate, and the king is stuck in the center. g6, queen h6, still there will be no castling, and white is fast with playing the center after rook e1. So this is again very dangerous. So another dodged bullet, even though I was mostly playing d5 back then. But the best move for black here is the move d6, and this is actually quite acceptable for black, obtaining some sort of a Scheveningen pawn center, but with the bishop already in b4. So ideas like bishop c3 ruining the structure after bc3 become possible. So let's say castles, castles. Now there are many moves for white, but neither is too scary. So for example, bishop g5 is one idea to take advantage of the fact that the bishop is not on b4, not on e7, so pinning the knight, but h6, bishop h4, g5 is now possible. And it's an interesting strategical idea. It exists also in some lines of the Najdorf. Bishop g3, take on c3. The knight is eliminated, so because after the knight will no longer control the d5 square, because after bc3, e5 is black's idea. So shutting this bishop on e6, and down without a knight on c3, there is black controls comfortably the d5 square. Knight e2, bishop e6. And black is quite comfortable here. The knight c6 or knight d7, and the bishop, even if f3 happens, the knight h5, knight f4 can be played. So black is quite comfortable here. Another idea is bishop d2, avoiding the doubling of the pawns. But now knight d7 is possible, but knight c6 also is possible, immediately targeting the knight on d4. And after knight c6, bc6, black should play e5, bishop e6 late next. Not d5, because after e5 the bishop is opened. The bishop on d3 gets an open diagonal, but e5, bishop e6 with comfortable middle game. In one of the games between the Indian superstars Gukesh and Erigaisi played in 2023, Gukesh played knight ce2, avoiding again the doubling of the pawns. And here Erigaisi played bishop c5. The bishop no longer has something to do on b4, c3, e5. Attacking the knight, knight f3. The knight drops back to f3 in order to keep an eye on the pawn on e5, so d5 is made more difficult for black. Bishop e6, knight g3. And here Gukesh played knight bd7, and he had a good position. But there is also another way of playing, which is to go h6 first, to stop knight g5 or bishop g5 ideas. And then develop the knight to c6, for example. Rook e1, knight c6. Very comfortable position for black. All the pieces are nicely developed. Okay, some ideas like queen c7, d5 can be played, rook d8, rook e8. Very comfortable development. So this means that the move bishop d3 is not so scary, but not for the reasons I had hoped in my youth, but for because of the move d6. Now we must turn our attention to the main move e5, and that is the critical move. Hitting the knight on f6, knight d5, and here there are two main moves for white. If you play this variation, I would expect that you will be seeing a lot the move bishop d2. Yeah, even though the most critical move and most dangerous move is the move queen g4. Yeah, we will take a look at that in a while. So we start with bishop d2, breaking the pin and defending the knight, the knight on c3. And after knight c3, bc3 with tempo. The key move here for black is bishop f8. Why it's a key move? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the move queen g4 features heavily for white in these variations. And by putting the bishop on f8, the bishop safely defends the pawn on g7, effectively taking the sting out of the move queen g4. So for example, queen g4 now makes very little sense. The queen can be harassed with h5, queen e4 and d5 now, ed5, bishop d6, ed6, bishop d6. It's quite okay for black. Yeah. White's pawns are doubled. Black will finish the development, and we'll have a good middle game position. So therefore, usually white plays bishop d3, and now another important move to remember: knight a6. The knight is going to the c5 square, keeping an eye latching onto that bishop on d3. Short castle, knight c5. And this has been played quite a lot by many players by Erigaisi in this line. He beat Van Forest, he beat Bologan, he beat Hovhannissian. So uh, great results for Arjun Erigaisi in this line. And the following is an illustration of Black's ideas. Generally speaking, Black wants to develop the light squared bishop on the long diagonal by b6 and bishop b7. So is an illustration. Let's say rook e1, b6. Yeah. Queen f3. For example, in the game Van Forest Erigaisi, Van Forest played queen g4, and after h5, bishop queen f4, bishop b7. Black was quite all right. Very soon he played bishop e7, g5, and took over the initiative. And this is an ideal setup for Black because he has the better pawn structure thanks to these double pawns by White, and excellent development. So look, the knight is excellent on c5, cannot be attacked. The bishop is the long diagonal. The bishop on f8 defends the pawn on g7, so queen g4 doesn't have any venom. And there are further ways to develop. Queen can come to c7, sometimes long castle, sometimes g5 as I mentioned, sometimes h4, h3. The rooks can sometimes be developed along the h file, rook via h5, via h6. So all the pieces are getting into the game. So let's see, queen f3, bishop b7, queen g3. This avoids the h5 idea. And now a6, controlling the b5 square, so the queen c7 can be played. a4, queen c7. Yeah. So Black is quite comfortable. Yeah, it doesn't really matter that the bishop in a way is not developed, but it safely defends the pawn on g7. So c4 now by White. Yeah, and now one also typical idea for these structures for Black is the move f5, gaining some space on the king side. And if he f6 after the exchange of queens and gf6, Black will have quite a good central pawn mass. Don't forget, normally endgames are good for Black thanks to the better pawn structure. These a4, c4, c2 pawns are quite ugly, and in an endgame, Black can easily target them. So f5 is a one good idea. Erigaisi against Bologan in the 2024 World Rapid and Blitz, he played d5, which was also fine, but it was much sharper because after cd5, bishop d5, c4, knight d3, Bologan could have made the position a real mess by taking on d5, and after knight e1, rook e1, the only way for Black to stay in the game is the move queen c4 with a very, very messy position. Black is not worse, but also it's quite a dangerous position for him. So I think f5 would have been a better practical choice there. So let's go back one more time out to the position after knight c5. Let's check queen g4 now. We said that this is basically useless now, but it is the way for White to activate the queen. So here there is nothing wrong with b6, obviously, but let's follow the game of Hovhannissian Erigaisi. He played h5, typical move, targeting the queen, queen f3. Now there is no b6 because the rook is attacked, but rook b8 is possible, and then b6, bishop b7 happens. And here White's best would have been to show more restraint and play a move like h3, for example, because in the game after knight b5, a6, knight d6, bishop d6, e d6, b5, we have another typical transformation for this line where Black voluntarily, happily exchanges the dark squared bishop and gets this pawn on d6 because the pawn structure is very solid. These f7, e6, d7 pawns are practically make the Black's positions king invulnerable, and the light squared bishop will be developed on the long diagonal. So queen g3, king f8, the king is super safe as the bishops cannot create any damage. h4, bishop b7, it's an objectively unclear position, but Black has very good chances here to round up either the d6 pawn or in an endgame to attack these pawns on the queen side. So Erigaisi went on to win this game as well. And after something like h3, instead of knight b5, b6, queen g3, bishop b7, rook fe1, a6, a4, we have some similar developments to the game with Bologan earlier on. Now rook c8 is a decent move, placing the rook on the c file, queen c7 can later be played, and so on. So we get a complex middle game, but Black is well developed, especially after queen c7, h4 can be further played to harass the queen. Yeah, and we mentioned the okay f5 here maybe not because of these checks on g6, depending where the queen is. But d5, again, d5, d6 ideas are still also on the menu. So complex middle game position, but good chances for black. So this is the move bishop d2, which, like I said, an unprepared player who knows d5 but is not so confident in his preparation or calculational abilities to go for queen g4 would be getting bishop d2, and then we get these positions which are kind of complex and but still very playable for black. Now let's move on to the most critical move, queen g4, attacking the pawn on g7. So just to show you that how dangerous this line is, knight c3 actually loses, even though the line is a bit complicated and white must know how to play precisely. I will just show the main line without the sublines, but this is actually losing for black after queen g7, attacking the rook. Rook f8, a3, the only move for white, attacking the bishop that threatens the discovered check. Knight b5 check, take the on b4, take on d4, and now again, strong move by white, bishop g5. Forcing the queen to go to b6, and now bishop h6. The point is that had white played bishop h6 immediately, queen e7 was possible. But now queen e7 is not possible, so the only way to defend the rook is to take on b4, but this runs into c3. Both an attack on the queen and the knight. Black manages to avoid losing material after knight f5, but after cb4, knight g7, bishop g7, rook g8, bishop d3. This is a lost endgame for black after bishop d3. Black will find it difficult to defend the pawn on h7 and the king side in general. And the king is also weak. The bishop on f6 is quite strong. And well, this is not the way to play. Therefore, after queen g4, king f8 is the move to be played. Not g6 because this weakens the dark squares, but king f8. And now white has a choice, but again, only one move that puts black on the brink of, well, serious problems. That move is the move bishop d3 here. But let's check the others. Bishop d2, it's a natural move, and again, one you can expect to get, simply defending the knight on c3, and now h5. And this is already a decent position for black. Standard move h5, harassing the queen, and wherever the queen goes, black gets a good position. So queen g3 runs into more harassment after h4, queen g4, and now knight c6, developing and attacking the pawn on e5, and after knight c6, bc6, it's a good position for black. Queen b6, bishop a6, yeah, black, the pieces are coming out naturally. Now queen f3 is another move. Knight c3 now, because the knight is attacked. Knight c3. Now both captures are possible, but against both, black gets a good game. Let's say bishop c3, queen a5, puts more pressure on the bishop on d3, and after queen, also the pawn on e5 is attacked, so queen e3, knight c6, black gets a good development. And after knight c6, bc6, the bishop will eventually come to a6, solving all black's development problems. So bc3 is more ambitious, gaining tempo against the bishop. Bishop drops back to e7. Bishop d3, queen c7, attacking the pawn on e5. Queen e2, defending the pawn. Knight c6, developing with tempo, still attacking the pawn on e5. So the problem with that pawn and the fact that black develops with tempo mean that black gets a good position here. For example, taking on c6, queen c6, attacking g2, castles, and queen c7, avoiding the skewer with bishop e4, so no immediate b6, but queen c7 and then b6, bishop b7 with good position for black. Always keep in mind that in these positions with doubled pawns, black has the better long-term prospects, has more exchanges, and getting closer to the endgame will give black the advantage because of the better structure. So f4, yeah. And now it's possible to play in more than one way. It's possible to be subtle and give the check on h4, forcing g3 and dropping back to e7. A bit too subtle to my taste. I think d5 is more straightforward. And after short castle, take on d4, cd4, g6, and black has a very stable, solid position. Bishop is developed to d7, and still some weaknesses to play with or play against on the queen side. And the king is still very safe. King g7, f5 will never happen, and the rook can stay on h8. So h3 g4 after h g would lead to the opening of the h file. That's a good position for black. So that's queen f3, and queen e4 is the third move. Immediately, we saw that attacking the pawn on e5 was one of black's main ideas. So queen e4 aims to have that pawn defended, but here d6 is the move, trying to exchange that pawn on e5. Now the position is pretty complex, and can get pretty murky, but objectively black is fine. Yeah. And I would say that if you play this variation, that's what you're looking for. You're playing for a murky game, you're playing for unclear position, complex one, where, for example, black is playing with an uncastled king, sometimes with a development disadvantage, but then gaining some compensation in the double pawns. So all these complexities are actually what black is looking for in these positions. Here there are more moves for white. For example, long castle is made by knight c3, bishop c3, bishop c3, bc3, and d5, shutting the d file with a very good position for black, as he can go queen c7, knight c6, and try to create play along against the white king. The engine suggests a move like f4, and here I think there are, the engine suggestion is actually king g8, which is rather vague because bishop e2, knight c6 is the proposed line. Again, pretty complex, quite possible to play like this, but I think even the immediate knight c6 is possible. I think this makes a bit more sense because there is no real necessity to go king g8 unless there is some trick knight e6 check and the bishop is hanging, but the bishop is defended twice now. So after knight c6, bc6, ed6, queen d6, castles, bishop b7, the positioning still is very, very complicated. Yeah. Chances definitely for both sides. Black has practically finished development. The king is not so bad on f8, can't be attacked. Yeah, maybe at a later stage g6, king g7, or king e7, or sometimes even h5, h4, rook h5 can be an idea. So complicated position here. Now knight d5 is another move, and here there is a typical trick for black in this variation. Take on d2, king d2. Now not take the knight on d5, but take on e5, and you see everything is hanging. Both knights are hanging, and they are even pinned along the d file. And after queen e5, knight c6, knight c6, bc6, black regains the pins without problems. The high-level game that reached this position saw the move rook d1, and after d takes e5, queen takes e5, knight d7, not knight c6, because knight c6, bc6, knight e4 is actually good for white. You see the problems along the d file, c4 becomes a threat, but knight d7, covering the d file and still developing with tempo. Queen g3, h4, queen f3, and now both moves are possible, putting a knight on f6. Knight 7 f6 looks a bit more natural to me, at least for allowing for bishop d7, but knight 5 f6 was played in the game Vashiela Graf Erigaisi, and black was still okay. Knight b3, queen b6, with a complicated game that eventually finished in a draw. But you can see both sides have good pawn structures. Black still needs to finish the development of the queen side, maybe knight e5, bishop d7, or knight c5. So black should be able to finish the development and have a good game. So this is the move bishop d2. Again, I think it's a natural move and you can expect to see it, but black is fine after h5. Another tricky move is a3. And here I think it was played in the game Nepomniachtchi Erigaisi. And I think here it was played online. I think Erigaisi messed up his preparation, because here he should have inserted the move h5, the standard move for black in this variation, but he took on c3 in the game, and after bc3, queen c7, yeah, now Nepomniachtchi had a chance to obtain an advantage with the move queen g3, yeah, defending e5. And the point is that after taking on c3, queen c3, queen c3, knight c3, a4, the knight, well, is a bit loose, but the problem is that after bishop a3, then after the knight moves from c3, knight b5 will also become an idea. And the bishop pair, black gets very difficult position. So that's why black should go h5 first, attacking the queen. Yeah. And now where does the queen go? If it goes to f3, now bishop c3, bc, queen c7, yeah, works. As the queen, the point is that the e5 pawn is being attacked. The queen is not on g3 to defend it. And queen g3 is met by h4. So bishop e2, queen e5, castles, knight c6 was played in the one of the earliest games in this variation, Shir of Jobawa, played online, which black actually won. So even though the position is quite unclear at this stage. And if case of queen g3, now bishop c3, bc3, h4. The point is, again, the queen is ideal on g3 because defends both c3 and e5, but h4 just dislodges it. So queen d3, queen c7, yeah, again a double attack on c3 and e5. f4, queen c3, knight c3, a4. This is a much better version for black. Knight a6, because h5 has been played to h4. The rook can be developed by h5 in some lines, even though I would say that white does have compensation here. Bishop a3 check, king g8, bishop d3, knight a4. So 2 pawns up for black, but white has dark square compensation, but pretty murky. So this is let's say, a semi-critical move a3, even though I think it's still playable for black. The point is that, okay, if black manages to establish a knight on c5, go b6, bishop b7, he would practically be winning with the 2 pawns up. So that's the move a3. And now, let's say a3. Now let's turn our attention to the best move for white, which is the move bishop d3. So queen g4, bishop d3. This is the way for black to play. Unfortunately for black, can't take on c3 because knight e6 does the trick. It's a check, and white wins the bishop on b4. And other moves are also tricky, like let's say d6, castles, take on c3, bc3, d5, knight b5 looks very dangerous. Bishop a3, king is stuck in the center, not so great. You probably guessed by now which move should be played, and that's the standard move for black in this position, h5. Queen e4. We mentioned that this is likely the best square for the queen, from where it's not subject to any more attacks by h4, and from where it defends the pawn on e5. And now the difficult move for black. We saw this idea in one of the previous lines, and that's the move king g8. It's a very strange move because the natural urge for black here is to develop, yeah. But after knight c6, bc castles, bishop drops back to e7, queen f3, let's say, take on c3, bc3, king g8, let's say rook b1. Black lacks the type of development he was having in the other lines. Whether that was queen a5, bishop a6, or some space on the king side with h4 and so on. Here, then nothing of that is left, and the king cannot easily get into the game. G6 just weakens the dark squares a bit too much. Yeah, so this is problematic. So that's why the engine wants to play king g8. Yeah, not an easy move, but kind of a waiting move to see what white wants to do. And here, another kind of a precise move that white should play if he is to get the maximum out of the opening, and that is the move bishop d2 only now. Against the other moves, black can survive more easily, at least. Yeah, let's say knight db5, knight c6, castles, f5. Yeah, attacking the queen. And now, if the pawn is allowed to stay on f5, black will exchange on c3. Yeah, then drop the bishop back, b6, bishop b7. He'll be fine. Yeah, but and after ef6, knight f6, queen h4, bishop e7, and let's make some more moves. Bishop g5, d5, rook a d1. It's a very complex position. White should be better, I would say, because this is awkward. King g8, rook h8, h5. But there are no direct ways for white to take advantage of that. Also, the knight on b5 is not exactly on its ideal spot. Likely to have to go back to d4. And black can still develop bishop d7 and so on. So it's dangerous by all means, but we are already getting into the territory which is the critical territory for black and the best moves for white to play the opening. So here, these lines show you the dangers that black faces against white's best play. So that's one, db5. Another option is castles, sacrificing a pawn. So let's say take on c3, bc3, bishop c3, rook b1, take on d4 before the knight gets to b5, d6, queen d4, knight c6 with tempo, queen f4 and b6. I think this is playable for black. White certainly has the compensation for the pawn, thanks to the control over the dark squares after bishop a3. But bishop b7 and black has finished basically development. All the light pieces are developed. The rook can come back into the game via rook h6 or h4, h3, maybe in connection with the bishop on b7. Can create some weaknesses on the king side. So this is playable. Yeah, this black can hope to withstand and soak up the initiative and, well, then end up being a pawn up. But the strongest move, like I said, for white is the move bishop d2. Yeah, now there is already a threat of knight d5. Knight takes on c3. Now bc3 is the better move, because after bishop c3, bc d6, black is fine. Yeah, eliminating this pawn e5, getting rid of the dark square weaknesses, black is fine. So bc3. Now if the bishop drops back to c5 castles, looks way too dangerous for black with this underdevelopment. You see white castled, all the pieces are developed, rooks are connected, and black is still lagging back in development. So this, I don't think it's so great. d5 is actually better, trying to get some space in the center and obtain some French-like position. So e takes d6, bishop d6, castles. Still looks dangerous because white is fully developed, but for some reason the engine here just, I don't know, it plays really, really strangely. Just the urge would be again to start developing some pieces, but the engine wants to go h4. Yeah? h4, maybe threatening h3. So somehow it calculates very deeply that black can survive making one more move in an basically open position, not developing, still keeping all the pieces on their starting squares and hoping for some h3 in counterplay in the future. h4 also introduces rook h5 idea, so maybe it's not a completely non-developing move, but still feels strange. So now h3 by white, stopping h3, and now e5. There are dangers everywhere. Knight d7, knight d6 just loses on the spot, for example. Queen e7 is possible with the idea to go knight d7, but rook f1, knight d7, knight f5 is also dangerous, even though the endgame may be drawable for black after take on f5, take on e7, rook e7, knight c5, bishop c4, bishop e6, take on e6, knight e6, rook b7. So clear pawn up for white, even though it's doubled pawn, it's a pawn up. Yeah. So maybe black can save it, but I wouldn't bet on it. That's why e5 is the move that must be played. Now knight f5, knight c6. So getting rid of the knight on e5, so the knight c6 can be played. The price that black has to pay is the abandoning, giving up the bishop pair. So knight d6, queen d6, rook a b1. Latching onto the pawn b7, so the bishop cannot be developed. But now we get to play some nice move, rook h5, yeah? Intending some bishop f5, queen e2, attacking the rook and g6. I would say white is better here, but black is not hopeless. Yeah, black can of course still play this, even though it's quite very dangerous. Yeah, I mean, pair of bishops still not developed. Yeah, but black survived the worst, I would say. And well, if white is not super exact, black can get counter chances, like I said, thanks to these isolated and weak doubled pawns on the queen side. And this concludes our analysis of the Jobava and Erigaisi variation e6 bishop b4. As I said at the beginning, it's a very sharp line, it's a very risky line, dangerous line. But if you think that your opponent won't be so prepared, and you fancy your chances in these double-edged complex lines, well, this may as well be the line for you. So thanks for watching this video. As always, check out my Chessable courses, check out my weekly Substack newsletter. If you really want to support my work, consider becoming a paid subscriber to my Substack, and at the very least, make sure you smash that subscribe button and continue watching my videos. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.